Now let's have a bit of wackademia as well. We've got students at Dublin University. This is horrible stuff.
She should be sent to Gaza, this one. Have a look
at this one.
I support Hamas. History is made that day. Very proud of my people. Very, very proud. Would love it if they would do it again and again and again and again and again and again and again.
So she's proud of mass rape, torture, slaughter, babies being beheaded, families burnt alive, women being gang raped and brutally killed. What is she doing in the West?
Feminist.
At a university.
What is she doing in the West?
Durham University, student there at Durham University, and before that we had a character at Dublin University at a debate who started ranting Allahu Akbar and all the rest of it.
And all the lefties who see fascism and Nazism and dog whistles
trigger warning,
everywhere.
safe spaces.
When someone is actually advocating for the murder of Jews again and again and again, like she was, where are they?
What happened, Rita? You remember, Rita, when a few years back, when the whole big debate on Twitter was whether or not it was all right to punch a Nazi, and lefty Twitter said, "Oh yeah, let's punch a Nazi," and of course, what they meant was punch a Trump supporter. What they didn't mean was actually punch somebody who wanted to murder Jews in the most heinous ways. That would be an actual Nazi, guys. But we don't punch them, probably because they punch
This
back.
is how far the gaslighting has gone in the West, where Donald Trump, the most pro-Israel president America's ever seen, was painted as some sort of a Nazi, anti-Semitic, fascist ogre, and his supporters likewise. And yet, when we are seeing people who have got this deep hatred of Jews, it's not just Israel. They might say, no, this is an Israeli issue.
This is the thing. This is the key. This is what everybody needs to take away from it. Yes, this is anti-Semitism, but this is also about the war within the West for the soul of the West. And this fight here that is happening right now, what we are seeing with that young person, what's happening at university campuses around Australia, around America, around Europe, is a sickness. And it is about the fight over whether or not we remain countries that have a liberal democratic outlook, or whether we slide down towards some sort of leftist totalitarianism, because what we're seeing here, all of this is not just about undermining Israel, it is about undermining the freedoms we all enjoy.
Well, and that was again evident when you see at these rallies in Australia, and there's going to be rallies in Melbourne and Sydney again today, or as
I think you mean
Amnesty International says, Naam and Gadigal. And that's this is the part of the anti-West agenda.
That's the
say
undermining.
we are not legitimate. The real names of these places are Naam and Gadigal, not Melbourne and Sydney. And it's that same philosophy. And if you actually listen to what is said at these rallies, they repeatedly link the Palestinian cause.
There we go.
With
Let's
the
have a look at this. So you can see at the bottom of your screen there. So this is a Palestine Solidarity Action.
Melbourne.
Right at the bottom. There you go. Naam, brackets Melbourne, Gadigal, brackets Sydney. This stuff drives me completely
this is a
nuts.
complete
You come
lie.
to Sydney Airport now and there's Gadigal everywhere. People voted no. They voted no. So 60% of Australians, we really have to speak up and make our voices heard and say, no, we don't want this. It's called Melbourne. It's not called Naam, and it's called Sydney. If we're going to start giving places multiple names, that way is just division and chaos. Let's unite together, which is what the people said in the no vote, rather than this endless division, James.
Well, it's not just about uniting, but it's also about rejecting this model, the same academic idea about Israel, that is an illegitimate settler colonial state and a European project, is the exact same rhetoric, that they use about Australia. And if you go on Twitter, you will find many activists saying, Hamas was right, wouldn't be bad to see the same sort of thing here. And this is the same logic, that anything that is a settler colonial state is therefore illegitimate, therefore any resistance is justified, therefore all sorts of atrocities are justified, and that's where we are.
Yeah, sorry,
and the left do make this point repeatedly. Even very high-profile academics did that after October 7, when they said, Or did you think decolonisation was going to be peaceful? So when they talk about decolonisation, when you hear these terms, and it's repeated here about white settlement, illegitimate settlement, we're on stolen land,
all that stuff.
always was, always will
yeah.
be. When you hear that sort of rhetoric, that is where it's coming from. It's the same philosophy. It's not just restricted to Israel and Gaza or American universities. We are having it right here, and you better wake up to it because it's totally...
100%. But let me just say, James, the poison comes from the universities. And this stuff, the majority of Australians do not agree with it, as we saw in the Voice referendum. As we would see in any referendum on any cultural issue, you would get similar 60, 70% of Australians say, no, thank you. And you get this 30% or 40% say, oh, no, we quite like this stuff. The reality is this poison is infused corporate Australia, and it is infused political and academic Australia.
I'm glad that you mentioned academia before there, too, because it's really important to note that this isn't something new that has just come out in the last few years. This actually goes back, if you want a little history lesson, go back to the 50s, go back to the 60s, go back to the French universities.
Yes.
And people like Herbert Marcuse, Frantz Fanon, Jean-Paul Sartre, who was a tremendous anti-Semite. They wrote and put the playbook in place for this settler colonial violence decolonization regime. They wrote books and books and books that have been marinating in the academy for decades now and finally coming to fruition, calling for violent ends and saying this violence is redemptive. It's happened in Israel, but they want it to happen elsewhere too.
It started in academia, the left's march through the institutions. It hasn't ended there. You mentioned, Ryan, one of the more sinister things is in recent years is that this has taken a hold in the corporate world, in the private sector, where you would think sanity would prevail. No, these kids are running HR departments, they're leading companies, and this stuff is everywhere now. It's in government institutions, of course it's in academia, it's in the culture. You look at the celebrities and what they preach and what they're mouthing, what the kids are saying on TikTok. It's a dangerous space we're in right now, and that's why it's so important